Hello everybody and welcome to episode 3 of the Let's Talk Mortgages podcast, brought to you by Green Mortgage and Protection. This week we're talking everything buy to let. So we've got Spencer Wood from Ultralets, one of the biggest letting agencies in our area, to talk to us about buy to let and the market. So welcome, Spencer.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
So kind of a bit of a backstory. I was on your Ultralets podcast last year.
Did a good job as well, I'd like to say.
Yeah. Who would have thought a voice like mine would be good for a podcast? But yeah, I don't know what time of day people listen to my podcast. I think it might be before they go to bed. But as long as people are listening and getting the information, that's the main thing. So yeah, give us a bit of a backstory about yourself, like, and obviously Ultralets and how you got started. Yeah,
what do you want to know really, or what do your listeners want to know? Is it because I can witter on forever about it, but
there's a bit of a crossover for us, isn't this? Obviously, you've got your podcast, which again started in this room.
It did, yeah.
You've started now taking that in-house as your team's grown. So, kind of like you started.
Yeah, I started when I left school, 2009. So I'd done a summer job, collecting a bit of rent for somebody. Decided I quite liked the idea of property management.
Is that like door knocking, like? Almost.
No. It was just, he was out of town actually, and he said, my tenants are paying the rent, can you collect it physically for me and pay it across to me? And because he wasn't in the area, didn't want to use an agent.
Yeah,
big mistake in my opinion. But anyway, so that gradually went into, he had a friend and then they had a friend, and just word of mouth really spread from there. And I got an office on Handleby Road in Hull, for those who know the area. Just me in there on my own, and then took an apprentice on, and then took another member of staff on, and gradually grew, professionalised what we were doing, moved office a couple of times since then, and now we're at sort of 1,250 managed properties in the area, in the whole area, Hull, Hornsey, Beverley, East Yorkshire, and 35 staff.
Yeah, and a nice office on Flemingate in Beverley as well, which I've been in, which is an amazing space. So thanks, you've quickly filled that in the 2 years since you've been there.
Yeah, so it's been a journey, and it's not for everyone, because there's been times where I thought, am I really doing the right thing here? But you get through these barriers, and I'm glad to say it's probably been worth its while.
We were kind of saying, like, before we started recording, that it is a bit of a slow burn getting a letting agent up and going, especially when you're picking up a property here, a property there. It can take quite a while to build a substantial business in lettings, can't it?
I think because obviously I was 17 at the time, so I didn't have mortgage to pay, or I was living at home with my parents. So in terms of being able to afford to do it, it was quite an achievable thing to do. I didn't need to take loads of money out of the business. Everything we did make went back into the business. Had I been in this situation I am now, 15 years later, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it from scratch, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
I don't know how somebody would start up a letting agency today.
Yeah, well, again, we're chatting, weren't we, about people that are selling up to go do something different. They've kind of been in the game long enough, and they feel they've taken their business as far as they can. So you've had quite a few acquisitions, certainly in the last 2 years.
Yeah, the first one was 2019, and then since then we've done another 7. So we're really a bit of a combination of a lot of smaller companies these days. But yeah, a lot of people have looked at it and said it's just not worth my while. The red tape's too much. The cost of employing people's too much. It can be a number of different things. The industry's got more difficult, and decided that it's probably best to get out and do something else. And that's where we've come in, paid them for their business, and taken the customer base on.
And that's kind of like how we were introduced.
Of which you were one of them in one case, yeah.
That's it, yeah. So I remember our previous letting agent, you'd bought them out, so you came and had a coffee with us in our office in Ergo, and kind of explained how you guys do things, and we've been really happy with the service that we get.
Good.
And obviously coming to your space and doing the podcast, I thought it was only right that we get the biggest letting agent in the area and an expert to talk about all things buy to let. So if you're happy to, for the next half an hour, we're going to kind of pick your brains on the...
Please do, yeah.
I was going to say the mortgage market then, that's me. We'll talk about property market and like investing and things like that. So obviously there's no denying, obviously, when different governments come in, regulations change and things like that, landlords are getting squeezed a little bit more. I say a little bit more than ever, really. So kind of like, what has been the biggest changes you've seen for landlords in the last few years?
Obviously, there's the Section 24 situation for people who own properties in their own name, which I think has been probably the biggest, and something you probably know quite a lot about.
Absolutely,
really.
Yeah.
And the dilemma between, do I set up a limited company to own my properties in, or do I just keep them in my own name? What's the offset cost balance of moving them across, paying the stamp duty and all the rest of it? So that's probably been the biggest bit. But you've got other things, smaller things, and things like EICRs have come in, legally mandatory now. Significant costs to those, I would say. £500-600 per property per every 5 years. It tends to be.
It's one more thing to remember as well, isn't it?
It's another thing for your agent to do, or you to keep on top of. You've got the smoke alarm situation, one on each floor. And these things might seem like small things, and independently, I think they probably are, to be honest. But when you build them all together, along with the gas safeties and all the rest of it, you've got quite a big admin job really, looking after even a couple of properties these days.
And I think that's probably what puts the value on having a managing agent as well. It's
Yeah.
like if you're a landlord that's got a handful of properties, you have to remember when your gas safety's up every year and make sure it's done on time. Then you've got to pay for it. You've got to instruct it. You've got to remember when your electric safety's done.
Yeah. Is my tenant in? Can the gas engineer get? There's so many things to do. But although that's for small landlords to letting agents like ourselves, which you could say is a good thing for us, it's also meant that we've needed more people. So that extra profitability has just gone on paying more people to do the job. It's not necessarily made it better for us.
I think the upside from all the changes though is it's making landlords become almost like professionals in what they do, rather than getting the slum landlords that just paint over something, get another tenant in, paint over the damp, and get another tenant in. You're actually having to put properties out there that are at a good standard. You have to do things to health and safety regs. You've got to be held accountable. So I think, yes, it's making it a little bit more difficult for people, but I also think it's making it safer for people and just raising everyone's standards.
That's one of the biggest things I've noticed probably since the start of my career doing this is, at the start landlords would do just that. It'd be give it a, wag it out with Magnolia or whatever you're doing, give it a quick clean, get the board outside. That would be the process. But now tenants are expecting a much higher standard of property, rightly so really, because rents are going up, as I'm sure I'll touch on soon as well. But people expect a better quality of property, and that's definitely the median quality has gone significantly higher.
I remember first looking at properties that we were buying. We got our first buy-to-let in 2016, and some of the properties you'd go around and there's a mixed match of textured wallpaper, and your first thought is, why does this not match? And why is it a different texture in the corners as it is to everywhere else? Because basically they've had a damp issue, just repapered it, painted over it and hope it goes away. So it's definitely brought the standard up. What we've seen on the Section 24 bit is we get people now that come to us, first-time investors, I'm going to buy a property to rent out, I'm going to do it in my name. My first thought is, because of how many people are now going down the company route, is, have you thought this through? Because people who don't have much knowledge just assume, put it in my name. But the people that do the research and things like that are thinking, do you know what? There's actually a lot of savings to doing it through a company. We never advise how to do it. We will always refer people back to their accountant. We can't give the tax advice. We can help with the mortgage advice and the strategy and stuff. But
I bet you get asked all the time for tax advice, don't you?
Yeah, so I kind of flip it and go, this is what I do. This is what works for me. Whether you do that is up for you.
You have to be careful, don't you? Yeah.
That's it, because if someone comes back to me and said, you told me to do this. I'm like, no, never.
Something I say all the time is people will buy one property and they'll say, well, I'm only going to get the one, so I'll just have it in my name. It's not going to be too much of a cost difference. And they end up going, the rent's coming in, that's quite tidy really, and making a few quid there. I think I'll get another one, then I think I'll get another one, and before they know it, they've got 4 or 5 properties, all in their own name. Section 24's hammering them. And they probably should have set up a limited company 5-6 years ago.
Or we get people doing that, but they buy 4 in 6 months. This is brilliant. And then the tax bill comes, and they're like,
tax on money you haven't even got. I haven't even had, should I say.
Because it's gone out on maintenance or things like that. But so obviously we've covered Section 24. We're chatting about the rent reform that was due to come in.
That was a bit up in the air for a while, and then obviously we've just had an election, which is, I think that was shelved by the Conservatives just before the election, actually, along with the smoking cigarette and ban or something. So it looks like that's gone to pot, and whether Labour will pick that up, highly likely they will. But we just don't know what's going to go on with that at the minute. And there's quite significant changes there, particularly when it comes to the legality side of things and serving notices. I spoke to a solicitor friend of mine recently who said, if it was to be brought in that Section 21 would be banned, then the Section 8 is going to court, the number of Section 8 is going to court would mean the courts wouldn't be able to cope with it. So it'd require a full new housing court to deal with it. So whether it's been fully thought through and whether that's one of the reasons why it hasn't actually happened yet, I don't know. But jury's out on that one at the minute, I think.
Because obviously we're seeing, because the cost of living's gone up, rents have gone up, and kind of rightfully so, because I think sometimes landlords get a bad name as profiteering, but it's a business like any other where your costs go up, and for it to be a sustainable business, your income has to go up as well to cover it.
Absolutely. It's a business, and also it's a service. You're providing a service to people for the house they're living in. People often forget that a landlord isn't just buying a property and putting somebody in and making a profit out of it. They're actually guaranteeing the boiler works and making sure everything in the kitchen's right, the property's secure all the time. all the utilities are working. So you're actually providing more than just a homeowner would get when they buy a property. And people often forget that. There is a lot of stress and responsibility that goes along with it.
Yeah, we were having this chat. Like, I've got a lot of clients that are portfolio landlords. I've got some that are fully retired because their portfolios of a size where they can live off it. And we were having the chat about, well, to get the best tenants, you put the best properties out there. Yeah. So your incentive to make sure you're getting top market rent, a tenant that's going to look after it, a tenant that's going to pay on time, and everything like that is, if you turn out a property like where you've done the bare minimum, you've just painted over something or whatever, they can see that you don't value the property, so they're not going to value it.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas if you can put the best product out there, like any other business, you're going to attract the best buyers anyway. Yeah. So yeah, like you say, you're putting a lovely family home out there that somebody can call their own for the next 10 years and be proud to live there, rather than something that's cold and damp. And
don't forget that landlords has to get a big hefty deposit together, more than they would if they were buying the house. So there's a big cash commitment to buying that property as well. It's not just like they've turned up with a couple of grand and they've been able to rent it. So there's a lot of exposure for an investor, really. So it's got to be, the property's got to be right, the rents have got to be up to where they need to be these days. I mean, 10 years ago, a 2-bedroom house in Hull was getting 350, 375, an average condition property. Those same properties now are up to sort of £550, £600.
Yeah.
So it's been needed for a while, really. It's been too cheap, in my opinion, in this area.
Well, they say like a rising tide raises all boats, doesn't it? So the regulation changes, the rising cost of living there's competition out there for landlords. It's like, yes, people always need somewhere to live, but people also want somewhere nice to live as well.
Yeah.
So I think
you've got wages going up. You've got, minimum wage has gone up. I think I read the other day from 14,000 in 2014. It's now at sort of 21, I think, around that sort of area. So if the base of income has gone up to that level, then people have got more money in their pocket, technically, which is only going to increase rents and food prices and all the rest of it, because people have got to be paid off the incomes of those businesses, I guess.
Absolutely, and I think both me and you would say the exact same thing, is properties are a fantastic investment for people because we live on a small island, we don't build enough houses, right. People are living longer, divorce rates are up, immigration's up, so obviously there's a lot more people fighting for those properties, which is what pushes house prices up.
You just wouldn't believe the amount of interest we get on the average listing. I mean, you're talking, any one time we have about 20 properties available out of the ones we've got, and we let about 30 a month, so the stock rotates every month. We'll come in on a Monday morning to maybe 300-400 inquiries for those 20 properties, which we have to then filter through and make sure we're getting the right people through the door to view it, and then even further down the line when they apply, make sure we've got the right person going into the property. Yeah. But that process of just administering the interest is huge.
So obviously off the back of like the regulation changes and things like that, have you seen almost like a shift in investor mindset in terms of like what strategy they're adopting or what sort of things they're looking for?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I've noticed recently is a lot of the, let's say, investors that are a bit longer in the tooth, have been in the game longer, and maybe a little bit more apprehensive about increasing the rents because they want to look after the tenants for a start. The tenants have maybe been in 10 or 15 years. They think, why rock the boat? If the tenant leaves, I'm going to be in for a refurb and all the rest of it. So they don't increase the rents. But what's then happening is they're coming to maybe want to sell one or two of those properties. The rents are way below market value and they're not able to sell them with the tenant in situ for a reasonable price. So a lot of investors are looking at it and going, that landlord's not getting the maximum they should be out of that property. The yield, if I'm buying at 10%, I can purchase it for a lot less than the actual market value. We're seeing people coming into the market doing just that.
Do you tend to find like the older investors, for lack of a better word, if they're kind of like mortgage free, they just let their properties run, like they're not bothered about amending the rent because
this is a problem,
they don't have a mortgage payment going up that's pushing that rent, because they own it outright, whatever they get rent wise is
and
theirs.
They don't want to risk losing the tenant because they know they're going to be then in for the council tax and the refurb costs, so that they just keep it as it is, but that is hitting them when it comes to selling. Yeah,
well, we were always taught when we're learning about investing, like all the books you read and stuff is, yes, you probably could put the rent up £25-50 a month, but if that then forces your tenant out and the property's vacant for 3 months, and like you say, you've got all the bills to pay, you've got a potential refurb on the way out, for that £300 a year extra you're going to make, it's just cost you £3,000 to do it. So
the difference now is that the house next door that's to let is probably £200 or £300 a month more than their house is, even with the rent increase. So it's still worth a while putting the rent up because that person cannot get a house for cheaper. And not to mention the competition, even if they do want that house next door and they're prepared to pay an extra £200 for it, they're still going to have another 25 people looking at the same house.
Because under regulations, you can review the rent once every 12 months. Yeah. Because I know with you guys, we get the annual reminder. And it's like, and sometimes like you guys are really honest and say, like, yeah, you're still getting market rent. We've done an analysis, or obviously things have changed. There's a lot of desire in that area. You can maybe do an extra £25 a month. Yeah. So once every 12 months, people can review it. So for those that are self-managing, every 12 months.
I think of the 1,250 we manage, in the last 18 months, we're around 600 rent increases. So half of them have put rent up.
Because will you guys do any like serviced accommodation or anything like that?
No, we don't really. There's other agents in the area that specialise in that a little bit more closely than we do. It's not particularly a market. I mean, what do you find a lot of people interested in that these days?
We're getting a lot more inquiries about it now. Yeah, I think.
Why is that, do you think?
I think because we get a lot of investors that do the courses. They buy the courses. You can buy stuff with no money. You can do rent to rent, stuff like that. There's no point speaking to me about rent to rent because it's not actually home ownership. So you don't need a mortgage because you're just renting it from somebody.
Do you even need insurance? Who insures it under that basis? Must be the owner.
Well, yeah. Where does the liability fall? So we get people where off the back of Liz Truss's mini budget in 2022, and I think rates actually went up 1% in a weekend. So that kind of squeezed a lot of would-be buyers. I mean, your professional landlords, those that are building the portfolio, they all spotted the opportunity, whereas the people that are just starting out or kind of dipping their toe into it, they took a back seat for a little bit. But then since then, because the returns on the family let weren't there, people did start to investigate HMOs a little bit. I did the same. I kind of got stung a little bit because I bought my HMO just as all the gas and electric went up.
Oh, really?
So on paper, when I agreed to buy, it's like these numbers worked really well, and then the gas and electric kind of doubled. Still worked more than a standard let. So off the back of that, we saw less inquiries for HMOs, whereas they're starting to come back now. But yeah, a lot of people now are asking about service accommodation because that's kind of on these courses. It's kind of like the buzzword at the moment.
I know Airbnb type models, they look great on paper, a bit like HMOs do. But I think if you did it over 2 or 3 years, you'd probably see that the income net is similar to just doing straightforward buy to let on the same property.
When you've got cleaning costs, much higher management costs, booking fees through Airbnb or whatever. What we find at the moment is lenders are adjusting to it. So if you held it in your personal name, it'd be classed as a holiday let.
Right.
So all the building societies offer like a holiday let mortgage. But if you're putting it through a limited company and doing it on short-term let serviced accommodation, there's about a handful of lenders to choose from.
So they're not touching it, basically?
No, I mean, more and more are coming to the market, but it's not where standard buy-to-let is. I mean, there's still some lenders that are just turning on to limited company buy-to-lets. Like Leeds Building Society brought it out last year, and it's like they're quite a big lender, and it's taken them this long to come into this market. But yeah, service accommodation seems to be the one where everybody's going at the moment because people are like, well, why would I let something out for £600 a month when I can get £150 a night or something like that? But then you start looking at cleaning costs and everything like that.
Bills, as you say, the bills are through the roof now. So.
You've got to furnish it. You've got to put Netflix in. Everyone wants super fast broadband when you go and stuff. So, yeah, we're seeing. I mean, will you get the inquiries about service accommodation?
We do get some corporate, situations where people come to us and say, "I've got a team of guys. I need somewhere serviced because we don't want to be setting up utilities and all the rest of it." We just don't offer it as a company. It's just not our bag really. We're more professionals, families, long-term buy-to-let type investments.
I think as well, it's like any business, isn't it? You kind of know what you're good at. You know what works for you as a business, and if you've set yourself up to do that, why deviate from it?
Yeah, I mean HMOs, for example, we manage a handful of them. Obviously, the one you had, we looked after. We've just always struggled with the cohesion issues within the buildings. I think if you've got student lets, that's all right because it's usually a group of friends. Or if you've got a company renting a whole house, again, the guys usually work together, so it's usually all right. Where you've got individuals living in different rooms, you've got somebody on a night shift, they're trying to sleep during the day, somebody else having a party or whatever it is. Yeah. The sort of calls we were getting were just, a nightmare to deal with. And I think if you're an agent geared up to deal with managing those sorts of properties, that's fine, but it just wasn't something that we wanted to get involved in. But it can be quite lucrative for us as agents and for the landlords if they're fully occupied.
Well, people say, don't they, like if you're going to look at buying a HMO, is your tenants want to be like the same sort of demographic. Yeah. So if you're saying you've got 4 contractors and they're all on the same shift pattern, that's fine because they're all going to bed at the same time, they're all getting up at the same time. Yeah. But if you've got some students that want to go out on a Wednesday night after the socials and crawl in at 4 o'clock in the morning just as someone's coming in to, or getting up to go to work or something, and we always looked at as well is professionals versus like LHA. So obviously if somebody's on benefits, they likely are they're in the house more often than someone that's doing a 12-hour nursing shift or something like that. So again, you're going to get clashes there, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, you're sharing things like kitchens and sometimes bathrooms with people that you don't really know very well, and people have different levels of acceptable hygiene and cleanliness within these areas of the house as well. And it'd be the agent or the landlord, if they self-manage, who gets the call to say someone's left something out in the kitchen or whatever. You know, it's just, to me, that is it's a totally different thing to being a passive property investor. And the sort of people we tend to work with prefer to be hands-off. I put my money in, I pass it to my agent, they've got an in-house works team and all the rest of it, they deal with it all, I don't have anything to do with it. We don't want to be bothering our clients with those sorts of things, really.
So we obviously have people that are experienced landlords, people are thinking about it, people who've just started. So from a management point of view, I would certainly recommend getting somebody to manage your properties because for me as a busy business owner is I don't have the time to field calls, to go collect rent, things like that. So obviously from your experience, what would you tell somebody who's starting out in investing, what makes a good managing agent?
Well, there's a few points really. Obviously, I would always suggest people use ultralets to manage the property if they're in the whole area. But anyway, the key points are probably things that you've already alluded to, like regular inspections, regular rent reviews. A lot of agents don't do that. You'd be surprised how many out there just collect the rent. You never really hear from them. They're not really doing much for you in the background. So those two things are quite crucial because that impacts your pocket as well as a landlord. You've got things like maintenance. You know, how are they dealing with maintenance? Have they got an in-house team like we have? You know, are they contracting everything out? What markup are they putting on the jobs? You just keep your eye on those sorts of things. And also the position within the market. You know, how quickly are they getting your property out to the market, to tenants? How are they processing leads? That all impacts your pocket at the end of the day and how quickly you're going to get it let.
Because you get some people that just want to go down the let-only route. It's like, I don't want to market the property. I don't know where to put it. Can you get me a tenant and I'll take over from there? So again, I would fully wholeheartedly go down the management route. But is that a service you guys offer as well?
We do, reluctantly, to be honest, because we don't have any control after that tenant moves in. We produce all the paperwork for the landlord, pass it across, they deal with it from there. But if that tenant always sees us as the agent involved, so we'll quite often get calls 6 months down the line saying, "Oh, this is broken, can you sort it?" Well, actually, we don't manage your property, it's down to the landlord. So the tenant gets a bit annoyed about that because they can't get hold of the landlord. Landlord sometimes gets annoyed with tenant because they blame us, saying the tenant rings me every 10 minutes, but you've paid for a letter-only service. So although it's a service we offer, it's not really a nice service, and I don't believe in it myself. As a landlord myself, I would never opt for that. If I didn't own this company, I would use an agent myself, and I would never do let-only.
And I know, like with you guys, obviously, your dedication to like customer service is if you've got a landlord that, right, I found you your tenant, you're responsible for them now, is if the tenant doesn't work out for one reason or another, maybe because they're not looking after them, they'll be then quick to point the finger at you and say, "You found me this tenant."
The agent is often the scapegoat from both sides. You know, why you'd put yourself between one of the most precarious relationships in society, which is tenant and landlord. People think you're mad, really, being an agent. But if we've got control of the situation and we've got our processes right, we know what we're doing, and we find our customer service is pretty good, as you say. You know, if we put ourselves there and we're equipped for it, we can deal with it properly. But it's when we're removed from that situation after the tenant moves in, but everybody still thinks we've got a piece of in the game, you know, that's where we get the problems.
Well, we find like in what we do, prevention's better than the cure. So if people, we get it all the time, people get a parking ticket and just ignore it, then it becomes a default, then it becomes a CCJ, and it's on your file for 6 years. A bit like being a landlord, if you can get on top of a maintenance issue early or a tenant issue early and kind of nip it in the bud, that's going to make life a lot easier for you as a landlord, isn't it?
The bulk of the work is done at the outset, where you find the right person for it, and that is the most difficult and most important part of the whole process, really. But we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't as agents, because if we find somebody good, in most cases we do, the landlord very rarely will hear from us about any issues, and they think, well, what am I paying an agent for to manage the property? I think, well, we've done the outset.
No news is good news.
No news is good news, really. It's been managed well, and you're not having any issues. That doesn't mean to say we're not doing anything. We're doing the rent reviews. We're doing the inspections, detailed inspections of the property, keeping on top of things. Quite often we'll field calls from tenants where we'll be able to sort of deal with an issue before a landlord needs to know about it. It could be a repair issue where the boiler pressure needs topping up. Landlord doesn't need to know about it. They're not going to get an expensive call out because we've dealt with it. You know, there's a lot of things that we're doing in the background. No news is good news, as you say.
I remember having a tenant move out of one of ours, and we quickly replaced them with yourselves. And I spoke to the guy, and I was like, well, I had, I think, 2 calls from this lady, and I thought, that's quite a lot. And I think he even said, like, that's nothing. You want to see our call sheet of the amount of time she's rang us, and we've sorted it, and you didn't need to know about it because it got solved then and there. So again, that's where a good managing agent's where